For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for more updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and our guest today is Dr. David Santoro. Dr. Santoro, David, thank you so much for giving us time. I know it's been an extremely hectic travel schedule of yours, but good to see you in person and do this interview.
Good to see you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure's all ours. Wanted to tap your brain in terms of your expertise, or one of the many strands of it in terms of nuclear weapons, and what you're reading of China's expansion, modernization, the build-up of its nuclear arsenal, given the light of how most strands in China's strategy is coercive.
So for a long time, China has been modernizing its military writ large, but its nuclear arsenal. But it's always said, we want to keep a small arsenal. We want to modernize because we don't have a big arsenal, but we need to modernize it. But it will remain small. We don't want it to be big. We don't want to get in an arms race, and we want to just modernize it so that it works. That's been essentially the Chinese position for a long time. This is changing. The rhetoric is the same. They keep saying that they want so-called minimum deterrence, but we see what we call a crash nuclear buildup, a more significant buildup of capabilities, nuclear, conventional, and also in other domains. And the rhetoric hasn't changed, but we know that they're actually building up that arsenal a lot more and a lot faster than what they used to. So the question now is that going to change the way they, act in terms of, strategic relations with the United States, India, and others? But what we have seen for the past couple of years, at least, is a much faster build-up than before. And so this is concerning.
And if you look at the strands of it, nuclear weapons build-up, I mean, there are a lot of reports on number of silos, etc., whatever. Just look at one aspect of the triad, the at sea or undersea one of that. I think there was a Pentagon report which recently talked about at least one Chinese nuclear, not only powered, but armed ballistic missile submarine, which is always patrolling, maybe in its bastion in the South China Sea, but it has a projection of reaching U.S. shores at least. The significance of that in terms of what you were talking about?
This is actually quite significant. This is new as well. For a long time, China had essentially a land-based force, and now it's developing weapons on sea platforms as well as on air platforms. And so that changes the dynamics. It's essentially becoming a triad, a state with a nuclear triad. That makes it a lot more threatening to countries, around the world, frankly. And also, it changes the way China thinks and talks about its policy. For a very long time, China has said we have a no first use policy. It is still saying that. And one of the ways to justify its no first use policy, one of the arguments that the Chinese have used is to say, we are not mating nuclear warheads with missiles. That means our no first use policy is real. Now, you cannot do that on a sea platform. You have to mate the two warheads and missiles. And therefore, one of the key arguments that they've used to justify, to show that no first use was real, is gone now. And now, of course, I would argue that we've never really believed that the Chinese had a no first use policy, at least in the United States. But these developments, these new developments, sea platforms and so on, is really changing the way China does nuclear policy. They may say that policy hasn't changed, but the fact is that essentially technological developments are pushing China to act differently.
And it's pushing other countries to act differently. I mean, if you look at what AUKUS is, and I wanted to get your thoughts on AUKUS in terms of the Chinese platforms. It is going to take time, of course, but what do you think of that as a counter?
So what I would say is that, for starters, we, at least in the United States, are still not reacting to what China has been doing. For about 20 years, China has been building its nuclear arsenal, initially slowly, but as I said, more recently, a lot bigger and a lot faster. We have not responded. The missile defense that you see, that you have seen the United States deployed, have been very limited and focused on essentially the North Korea problem. It's not been a reaction to China. The question is whether or not that will change. We have seen changes in the broader sort of strategic environment. So you mentioned AUKUS. This is certainly a reaction to this, but it's as you rightly said, it will take time, and it's still up in the air about the significance of this. But this is certainly a reaction to, I would say, more than just the Chinese nuclear arsenal. It's a reaction to China as a whole and the way it acts, and essentially acts vis-a-vis regional countries and the United States. So it certainly is a response to that.
There's a nice April Fool's joke, I think, that was put up online by Naval News when, we know what happened when AUKUS came into power and the Barracudas in France and U.S. and France and Australia, and what happened. This joke suggested that France had joined AUKUS, make it FOCUS, I think. But the larger issue of there is talk about JAUKUSI, Japan and India, other countries in the Indo-Pacific who are positioned against China, not because of their own viewpoints, but because of, as you're saying, the way China is acting. You see the enlargement of that, at least strategically, if not nuclear way.
So yes, you mentioned Japan, India, I would say Canada as well. Yes, a number of countries are actually trying to think about how to position themselves around AUKUS. And of course, AUKUS, a lot of it is about the subs, but it's also about high-tech cooperation, industrial base development. And so a lot of countries are trying to see what that could mean for them. As I'm sure you know, a lot of Southeast Asian governments have been critical of AUKUS, but they've also been interested in that so-called second pillar with regard to technology, because they are interested in how they can benefit from that. I think we don't really know who's going to join. It's like the discussion about the Quad. You hear discussions about Quad Plus, about who could join the Quad. I think my own sense is the Quad will remain the Quad. It's just who is going to be partnering with the Quad. And we will be in the same situation in AUKUS, I think. You'll have countries that are cooperating closely with AUKUS without necessarily joining. But ultimately, it will have to be cooperating about what? What is it going to be about? And so I'm not really surprised to see potentially France working on the sub-deal, but also in other areas, just as it would make sense for Japan to join in some fashion, perhaps as well about India. I know less about what India could do, but I think there is interest in some quarters in positioning India in some ways vis-a-vis AUKUS.
The Indian and U.S. relationship has also progressed manifold over the last couple of decades, especially in the defense and technology field. And looking in these two prongs, one is dealing or countering or containing or constraining China, and the second is the West and even understanding in India of the need to diversify our defense equipment away from Russia, not because it's Russia, but because we don't want to be dependent on one. In terms of nuclear-powered submarine technology, which we have been so, and we have a legacy issue with the Russians in terms of both experience and then our indigenous nuclear-powered submarine technology, which is in place now. Do you see the U.S. moving in that direction, or is that too much, or do you see France helping? There have been suggestions by Dr. Ashley Tellis of something called INFRUS, another alphabet soup thing. But your thought on this?
So I think it's probably too soon to tell. as far as the nuclear cooperation is concerned, it probably will take quite a long time, just because, as you rightly said, the cooperation that India has had and still has with Russia it's a deep, form of cooperation. And so before that can move, if this is where India wants to go, I think it would take some time. But I think there's a lot of potential for, frankly, expanding and deepening the India-U.S. relationship in a number of ways, besides the nuclear component, which is very sensitive and will probably take time to get there. But I'm very enthusiastic about the prospect for stronger India-U.S. relations. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I'm here, is to try and see what can be done and how. So, before we get to nuclear cooperation, which again, very sensitive, will take time, there's a number of other things that we can do. And I think one of the things where right now New Delhi and Washington can agree on is how to deal with China. And I think this is really where there's a lot of potential. The Russia dimension will remain a sore spot in India-U.S. relations, just like, frankly, what the United States is doing vis-a-vis Pakistan. I think that's going to be difficult from an Indian perspective. But there is an opportunity for a lot more cooperation between India and the United States when it comes to China.
And you have your, I wouldn't say loyalties, but your heart in two places. It's France and the U.S., right? And India can benefit from both of them, and has been actually already.
Right. So I grew up in France. I'm still a French national. I'm a U.S. national as well. So I'm a dual citizen. I tend to think that from a U.S. perspective, the United States would benefit in engaging India in the same way as France has engaged India. And by that I mean that from my perspective, Washington should try and see where it can cooperate with India and where it's possible, without necessarily having to rally India behind its leadership, which, if this is frankly what the United States likes to be. My sense is it would be a lot more productive to try and identify specific areas of cooperation, despite the fact that there are obstacles and challenges, and then focus on those. So I'm a proponent of, I guess, a more interest-driven approach when it comes to those relationships. And even more generally, I think the United States, frankly, would benefit a lot more by focusing on interests more so than on values.
It's an interesting point in a whole another interview. I think we can debate or at least talk about interests and values, because India has been pushing that a lot of late. You mentioned earlier Southeast Asian countries and the problems they have in balancing their proximity to China, even if there's a coercive action that is taken by the Chinese against almost each of the ASEAN nations. But do you see how these minilaterals, or it's not just bilaterals, trilaterals are working in the area? India has been working with many of the Southeast Asian countries. The Philippines, for example, we have a deal for the BrahMos supersonic missiles. How do you see the Southeast Asian, South Asian and the West dealing with China?
So you mentioned India's relationship with Southeast Asia. I mean, the whole Act East policy, I think there's a lot of promise. And the deal, the BrahMos deal with the Philippines, and I think Vietnam as well.
Nothing has come out of it, but I think there was some interest. We're still not sure.
Right. A number of Southeast Asian governments have expressed interest.
Maybe Indonesia.
That's what I read as well. I don't know how far that's gone, but I've read a general interest here. I think that's an opportunity for cooperation, frankly, between the United States and India. I think approaching Southeast Asian countries in different ways, could offer a good space for the two countries to cooperate. Now, Southeast Asians, first of all, there's not one Southeast Asian view. I mean, different governments see China different ways. But I think there's an opportunity for India and the United States to try and engage different countries when it comes to China, and more generally beyond just China. So, I think there's a lot that the two countries can offer when it comes to addressing transnational security threats as well. So I think this is a promising area.
It's not just alliances, coalitions, partnerships, friendships that are working on this side. Your thoughts on the Russia-China no limits partnership as such? There's been a lot of debate online among analysts whether it's actually a military alliance or not. I mean, the words apart, how important is that?
My sense is I would tend to qualify it as a military alliance. And I know this is not popular, but since the 1990s, that cooperation has never stopped growing, has never stopped strengthening, and it's been deepening in areas that, frankly, even 5 years ago, we just could not even imagine. So, to me, it looks like they are looking like an alliance, a military alliance. Now, it's very, very different from the way NATO looks like, the way the U.S.-Japan alliance, U.S.-Australia alliance look like. But at the same time, I think it's not wrong to say that it looks like a military alliance. There was a great, you mentioned Twitter earlier, but there was a great thread by a professor who goes back to the definitional issues and shows that based on historical and definitions, it's not wrong to say that this is a form of alliance. And this is my view as well. Now, that said, I will also recognize that it's not an equal relationship. And clearly in that relationship, China is in the lead, and the little brother really is Russia. I don't know how long that relationship can last. I would argue that from my perspective, given what Russia is doing, it's in a position to be making demands on China. It's driving the agenda, if you will, by doing what it's doing in Ukraine. It's forcing China to make decisions on what it should do in that relationship. So it is a little brother, but it's also driving the agenda. But there are limits to the partnerships. And in fact, in the discussions that I've had with Chinese scholars, they will say, no, there are limits, and limits our interests. So, there have been many discussions about the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons at some point in Ukraine. Frankly, I think if Moscow were to do this, my sense is that China would have a very hard time backing Putin. So that's one of the limits that I would identify. Of course, it's all context dependent, so it would depend on a lot of on how it happens, but it probably would be a red line for China.
Since you brought up that issue, again, want to get your thoughts on what is said to be President Putin's announcement of a proposal. We don't even know whether there's a plan as yet of stationing tactical nuclear missiles in Belarus. While one of the key positions of Russia is that no other nuclear weapon states or alliances should actually position nuclear weapons outside the homeland, so to speak. But how does that change the dynamic?
Well, it's a little contradictory because Russia for years have been saying that the so-called nuclear sharing arrangement of NATO is illegal. And now it looks like this is what Russia wants to do with Belarus. So I think Putin cannot have it both ways. Either what NATO is doing is illegal, and if that's the case, then he shouldn't do it with Belarus. But now coming around and saying, well, no, what we plan on doing with Belarus is similar to what NATO is doing. Well, you got to pick a word. It can be one or the other. I think we don't really know what the plan is right now. I would tend to think that a lot of this is probably just rhetoric. It's too soon to tell. It's certainly an escalation. And if that happens, it would be a deterioration of the current situation. It would increase tensions and risks. So it's not a good development. But I think this is a way right now for Putin to put pressure on the West in what's going on in Ukraine.
And in terms of technology, where are we currently at? Because I do know there was, I think, a U.S. test recently in terms of missile defenses systems. How we've always, at least in theory, looked at not the projection, but the increase in weapons technology and the increase in defense technology kind of going hand in hand. One step ahead and then there's another defense that comes up. Where are we currently on that front, and how will that affect nuclear weapon states?
Right now, the United States has a very limited missile defense program. And it's still designed to essentially, the targets are so-called rogue states. In fact, I'm not even sure we're using that term anymore, because with the rise of great power competition, it's gone away a little bit. But the missile defense systems that the United States has been developing are essentially meant to address the threat posed by North Korea and Iran to some extent. It's every single U.S. official document has said that it's not meant to undermine the strategic balance with China and with Russia. Now, of course, Beijing and Moscow are saying, well, no, actually, you are trying to change the balance and establish so-called absolute security over us. That's not what's going on. It's not what's happening. And in fact, I will even go further and say that Chinese and Russian scholars that are following this issue very closely know that U.S. missile defense cannot undermine the balance. They will say, well, maybe those systems cannot upset the balance right now, but if you can lay the groundwork for it and then build it up, integrate it with allies, and then after a while, yes, you will be able actually to essentially undermine that balance. But right now, that's not what's going on. It's still a very limited program, and frankly, it's expensive as well.
Right.
So,
but talking about advanced technology, you've done a lot of work and you continue to do a lot of work on integrated defense with advanced technology. When you're talking about now hypersonic missiles, advanced artificial intelligence, robotics, everything that's coming into the picture now. If you want to give us an overview of what you think.
The buzzword in Washington is integrated deterrence. And it has been so since probably 2021. And it's essentially the idea that you need to integrate, you need to bring together all these key technologies to essentially be able to deter better. That's one piece of it. The other piece is that we need to also integrate U.S. and allies together so that they can act as a force multiplier. And so when we talk about integrated deterrence, we talk about integrating technologies and also integrating the United States and its allies, and for that matter, allies among themselves as well. So it's in a summary, an effort to do more collected work when it comes to deterrence. It's very challenging. It's very difficult because all these technologies have been very siloed. And similarly, when it comes to allies, they all have different levels of competencies. And so getting them to work together is difficult. But frankly, this is in terms of the general trajectory, this is where the United States is going, trying to better integrate these technologies and better work with its allies to transform in some ways the way the Indo-Pacific security architecture is going to be, responding to the so-called China challenge.
And since you're talking about where we are going, where are we going in terms of science? And I mean, it's so difficult for a layperson to distinguish between science and science fiction. I mean, it's nice to see in the movies. I was reading a recent article on the Chinese developing a radiation-resistant super soldier, things like that. I mean, where do you see advanced technology, like we're talking about integration of human beings and technology as well?
I don't know what the Chinese are doing.
Yeah, no one knows whether it's propaganda, whether we don't know about that.
Right. I think, science is moving very, very fast right now, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence. And, there's a discussion about so-called artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is another problem, or another, development. I don't know what this will mean for warfare. I'll give you one example. In the discussions that I've had with Chinese scholars, they talk about integrating artificial intelligence into command and control systems for nuclear weapons. And the argument that the U.S. side has been making is, well, you might want to keep humans in the loop because you don't know how artificial intelligence. We don't know. No one knows what it could mean. But the reaction from the Chinese side has been, well, actually, no. This will reinforce safety of those systems. It's possible. My sense, and I don't know a lot about artificial intelligence, but my sense is that, again, science is moving very fast. We're integrating, and get back to that word, artificial intelligence everywhere. And I'm not sure that we know the implications of all this for warfare, but in a range of other fields as well. And so I think, we are in many ways in uncharted territory.
Dr. Santoro, absolutely a pleasure hosting you in Delhi. Thank you for your time and sharing your experience and expertise with us and all our viewers on StratNews Global.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great honor.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
And for all our viewers, do like this video, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, do follow all our social media handles. If you follow our Telegram channel, you will get updates on when we put up articles on our websites or interviews like this with Dr. Santoro. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.